are at the Week 8 recap. Let's go. Second half of the season is officially underway now that Week 8 is behind us. How do you feel about your team? I know if you're Aaron, if you're Joe, you're probably feeling pretty good. Lots of points, long win streaks. Guys are definitely already looking ahead to the playoffs. To me, everybody else has to wonder which team is going to show up, which of their teams will show up. We've all been up and down, some more than others. We'll talk about that as we look at our scores from last week. Do you start getting nervous? Are you getting nervous? You just going to ride this out and see where you end up? Kind of curious what you think about that. But let's take a look back at our scores from this last week. Kamish gets a much-needed win, although still has yet to break 150. Unfortunately, poor Mother Flacco didn't rely on Mother Flacco. I feel like there's some sort of irony to that, well, let's just take a look at what could have been. Kamish basically maxed out his roster. One minor adjustment would have been the difference, although turns out it didn't really matter. Poncho, on the other hand, he had a lot of points left on the bench, primarily Joe Flacco. So thank you to Tucker Kraft on National Tight Ends Day. He pretty much powered the win for Kamish. No thanks to Bijan. Where did that guy go? Or Caleb Williams, who, just decided not to throw touchdowns last week. Whatever. And thank you, Poncho, for not trusting old Joe and letting me slide in and have the win and stick with a winning record. My playoff hopes remain alive. Poncho's drop. He needs to make a little bit of a run if he wants to make the playoffs. Our next game, last place, Hoffman versus Don Chris, who's looking to make a little bit of a splash and make a run to the playoffs himself. This is the Jekyll and Hyde situation, right? Don Chris shows up sometimes he doesn't. He's got 3 games this year of 116 points, and then he posts a 196 this week for the high score on the week. Just about, as you see, squeezed out every last point that he could have to get there, which means that poor Hoffman didn't, again, have a chance. Whatever was on his bench wouldn't have really mattered. And he drops his 7th in a row. He's all but eliminated from the playoffs, although technically not yet. So still something to play for. Next game, we've got Alex Billy and Shankopotamus. This was kind of the slow burn, right? Not very interesting game as you look at the numbers. Billy gets his first sub-100 point performance, which he said he was expecting. Better to have it now than later in the season or even in the playoffs if you get there. He only had one player over 20 points, which was really not going to help him out. And not a lot, as you see, left on the bench. A perfect roster could have snuck him the win, but frankly, that was a long shot anyway. So Keith survives. He only had 2 players over 20 points, but it was enough to make up for A.J. Brown not playing and him missing that. Keith played the only team this week that he could have beaten. He had the second lowest score on the week, and as things stack up, sometimes it just works. You only got to beat the guy that you're playing, and that was the only guy he could beat, but he did. So he comes back to even on the year, and actually gives himself an interesting opportunity, which we'll talk about when we look ahead to next week. One more game here, not the last game, but this was the number 2s that we kind of highlighted from last week, Joe versus Ian. This was one of the more interesting games because not only were there decent points scored, but it went down to the final game of the week. It went down to the Monday night game, and so we actually had something to watch. I guess some of us had something to watch for. I don't want to talk about the Monday night game. Anyway, so tight ends on National Tight End Weekend, I guess. I don't know if it's a day or a weekend anymore. It doesn't really matter. But Ian went in, had to feel kind of confident, 11 points head-to-head with tight ends. Unfortunately, Ertz was playing with a backup who was not great. Dropped one too many passes on that one, and unfortunately Kelsey on the other side for Joe caught one too many passes. Hadn't caught the touchdown, hadn't been able to just run free through the middle of the defense. Maybe that turns out to be a little bit different, but instead it's a 4.5-point win for Joe. Gives him his 6th straight win. He's averaging 161 during his 6-game win streak. That's not nothing. That's definitely something. So he's looking to stampede into the playoffs. Not quite the steamroll, because unfortunately for him, there's a team that's got a much bigger head of steam going in. But as you look at the potentials, both managed their rosters very well. So really this could have been a toss-up. Came down to poor quarterback performance from the backup on Monday night. Sorry, Ian. That's just how it goes. So our final game, this was the ones. Number 1 in the East, number 1 in the West. And it really wasn't much of a game as you look at it. Aaron posts his high score of the week, his high score on the season, second highest on the week. So he just breaks 190. Still had points left on the bench as you look. Could have been over 200, although he did manage it fairly well. It doesn't matter what Seth Mike did. Hopefully he drowned his sorrows with some whiskey business. But managed his roster fairly well. Nothing he would have done other than starting the entire bench could have beaten the champ. So here's where we are. 7 straight wins from our current reigning champ. He's at 172 a game over his 7-game win streak. I don't know how we top that, frankly. Jonathan Taylor is just a beast. Drops a 42-point game. He's got the number 1 running back, the number 2 quarterback in Bo Nix, the number 2 and number 3 wide receivers, and even as the number 3 kicker. Can anything stop the reigning champ from a repeat championship? I guess we're going to see, because he's just on a roll as he goes through. On the other hand, Seth Mike, he's just barely hanging on, right? Bottom half of the scores for this week. Not enough on the bench to really make a difference, but by virtue of not great performance, not great play in the rest of his division, he still hangs on to the number 1 spot for now. So there's the way the scores stack up and what we see from this past week. Let's take a look at the standings as we go, and we look at all the powers really in the West. We've got 3 teams at 5-3 or better. Any one of those 3 would have the clear, or at least a share of the number 1 spot in the East. So we'll see how that all shakes up. Only a 3-game spread as you look down to the Eastern Division there, which really means that it's wide open. Even Poncho could make a run for the number 1 spot in the East with 6 games left in our season. So we'll have to see where everybody falls at the end of that. Looking at our overall stats, it's no surprise. Our number 1 team, number 1 scoring team, number 10 team, fewest points scored, hasn't even broken 1,000. Hoffman's the only one that hasn't quite made it to that benchmark just yet. You look at Ian, man, he just cannot he can't catch a break, right? 3rd most points scored, and yet he's sitting at number 6 overall. Just the way the numbers are going, 8 weeks in, things look more even than they really are. They look more even than they have been over the games. So he's obviously looking to make some adjustments there. Look at points against. Again, sad times for Hoffman. He has the fewest points scored and the most points scored against him. There is a 25 point per game difference between most points and least points. So we see one of the reasons why Seth Mike is actually in first place, fewest points scored against him. We'll have to see if he can continue to score enough points or if everybody just comes up short against him. We'll have to see how that goes. Power rankings for this week. So Kamish won, but dropped another spot down to 6. He was at 5 last week. We see Joe moves up to number 2 with his win, and Seth moves down to number 3 with his loss. Keith slides up a couple of spots to number 4. Ian drops a spot, and our 1, 7, 8, 9, 10, so the bottom of the barrel and our very top, these guys all stay the same for the projected final standings at the end of the year. Take a look at our pop, our random number that doesn't really mean much. The top 3 stay the same. This week was actually the highest average percentage to perfection at 89, and it brings our 8-week average, as you see, up to 86.5. That's the standard. That's the overall average, but it's nice to see that even Hoffman brought himself up about a point, a little over a point on the season, so good for him. Now, as we look ahead to this next week, week 9, how many blowouts will we see? We've got your champ versus commish. Aaron hasn't scored under 158 points since the first week of the season. Your commish hasn't broken 145 all season. Is this going to get really, really ugly? Ooh, or could this be the surprise, the dark horse, the surprise upset of week 9? Obviously, that's what I'm hoping for. But we also have Joe versus Hoffman. Fewest points against and the second most points scored. We're gonna see how that's all gonna work out. Will we see the 200-point Joe or the 100-point Joe? Right. Will Hoffman stop his 7-game losing streak? He can score some points, and Joe's been known to score very few. We'll see which way that goes, which way it turns, and somebody's streak will stop this week for them. Now we also look at Seth Mike versus Keith. This is an interesting one. It is essentially for first place in the East. If Keith wins, they'll be tied in their head-to-head, splitting their games, but Keith has 6 more points scored, which would become the tiebreaker. If Keith wins, he could be in possession of first place in the East. Who would have seen that coming a month ago? But of course, Ian could throw his hat in the ring. If he wins and scores enough, it could get a little murky there. It could be essentially a 3-way tie at 5-4 for first place in the East. That would make the run to the playoffs very interesting. Watch for all those games, see how it plays out, and enjoy week 9.